One of my sanity projects during lockdown was to sit on my back porch and randomly research stuff and post the results on Instagram. It led to this sort of epic, sprawling investigation of this confection, the Tiffany diamond feather, which was made for the 1876 Philadelphia Exposition. I fell madly in love with it. In the end, the Tiffany diamond feather saga had 450 pages and used 1,000 images. And there were all of these different chapters and really interesting takeaways and discursions and things that I found along the way. I posted the whole thing on Tumblr. I also produced a shorter version of it that I offered as a Zoom lecture to the Jewelry Library in New York City. So there's a link below to the recording of that. But there were other mysteries that continue to haunt me after that I didn't investigate. And there were questions from the audience that got me thinking about other aspects of this project that I should have researched and didn't. So this is sort of a postscript, another chapter that comes out of some good audience questions. The biggest unanswered question was why big, important gemstones were repeatedly recut over time. Why would you take an 800 carat stone and hack it down to a 54 carat stone? Why would a stone be recut at all? And it turns out there are some really interesting answers. The first reason is just to remove flaws. Flaws, even ones we can't see with the naked eye, prevent light from passing through a stone and getting where it needs to go. The Koh-i-Noor diamond is a good example of this, and we'll revisit it later because it's the good example of a lot of things. When it arrived in England from India in its original centuries-old Mughal-cut form, it had small central flaws, yellow flecks running through it. And the British experts felt that these flaws were responsible for its lack of brilliance, and they decided that they should recut it to improve it, making it a much smaller stone. Another reason stones are recut frequently is just to repair damage. We assume all gemstones are super hard like diamonds. In fact, diamonds are very hard, but the next hardness rating down on the hardness scale is very far down. So stones like rubies and emeralds are actually quite soft and get damaged by their own settings. If they work loose, the prongs can start chipping away at the stone. They can get scratched on the surface. And more frequently, people wear them with diamond rings next to a diamond ring. And that bully of a hard diamond ends up chipping the softer stones worn on adjacent fingers. Even diamonds, which are very hard, can be damaged. If you drop them on a hard surface, they can cleave, split along an interior fault line. They can be damaged from thermal shock during some cleaning processes. And oftentimes, a prong will loosen and a diamond is lost, so a larger stone is cut down to replace a missing stone in a piece of jewelry. Stones have been recut also to match new materials that arrive and offer new opportunities in jewelry making. Platinum is the best example of this. In the 1880s, we started using platinum in jewelry, and it's stronger than gold. So you could make a ring with smaller, thinner prongs holding a stone in place. You could make a brooch with a backing that's perforated and pierced all over the place because the platinum was really strong, still strong enough to contain the stones, but disappear in the process. So recutting stones to match what platinum would allow changed the shape of a lot of stones at the time. The most popular reason stones have been recut is to break a curse, and most of us have read an Agatha Christie book or a Tintin cartoon where this is true. The most famous of these stones is the Black Orlov diamond. It was stolen from the eye of a Brahma idol by a Jesuit clerk, so cursed by two different religions, the Hindu gods and the Jesuit gods, cursed the stone and its owners, and there was a whole trail of owner suicides after that. So the stone was eventually cut into three to break the curse, and that 195 carat Orlov diamond became a 67 carat diamond. It's likely / probable that none of that is true. And this is the case with all large named gemstones. The allure of the story is as exciting as the stone itself. In this case, black diamonds weren't found in India. Black is not an auspicious color in Hindu traditions, so it likely wouldn't have been the eye of an idol. And most tellingly, the cushion cut of this stone, which is a 100-year-old tradition in gem cutting, doesn't really support that story. But it's a good story. Another reason stones have been recut is to disguise them when they've been stolen. And the most famous example of this is the French blue, the Tavernier blue diamond, which was originally a 115 plus carat diamond when brought from India to France in 1666 by the jeweler Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, who sold it to Louis XIV. And the Sun King had it recut by Jean Pitou in 1671 to be a 69 carat stone with a 7-rayed sun on the bottom. So when you looked in the stone, you would see the symbol of the Sun King. And that removed 46 carats. That stone was stolen during the French Revolution and never seen again. But in 1812, out of nowhere, another incredibly rare blue diamond appeared, the 45.5 carat Hope diamond, which we can see today in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington. We now know it's the same diamond, but for a very long time, it was assumed that those were different diamonds because they were so different in size and cut. Another reason stones are recut is just to match changing fashions. When the Kimberley diamond was discovered around 1870, it was a 490 carat elongated flat crystal, which didn't really lend itself well to the European cuts that were popular at the time. So it avoided being cut at all. It was polished up and sold to the Tsars of Russia, who appreciated it as a piece of nature. And then with their demise, with the Russian Revolution of 1918, the stone resurfaced on the Western market. And this is another reason stones are recut. One group of wealthy people fall out of favor, lose their money, the stones resurface with new people who have new ideas about what that stone should be. So the Kimberley diamond was finally cut for the first time in 1921, and it was cut to be a 70 carat stepped gem. This flatter cut, it's an emerald cut or a stepped cut, lends itself well to large stones because it allows them to be worn closer to the skin than a deeper cut. And it's well suited to these very large stones, but it's also a style of diamond that would be more popular in the Art Deco period when geometry and rectangles were all the rage. The Kimberley diamond was recut one more time in 1958 by the Baumgold brothers. I'm not certain why, but I suspect it was to remove some flaws. It's now a 55 carat diamond at the Smithsonian, so you can go see it. This idea of recutting a stone to better match fashion is also true on a smaller scale. People who have inherited a ring from their grandmother or their great-grandmother might not like the ring. In designing a new ring to house that stone, oftentimes the stone needs to be recut. This also relates to breaking curses. Many people inherit a ring at the time of their wedding from a mother-in-law, and they want the family connection, but not the mother-in-law association. So sometimes recutting a ring or resetting a ring is a subtle way of accepting a gift, but personalizing it in a more appropriate way. Stones are often recut for economic reasons as well. The Russian Revolution wasn't the only time that gems resurfaced as wealth migrated. The Great Depression saw a major sell-off of old family jewels. Pre-Civil War diamonds that were old mine diamonds came to market and were perfect for recutting and transforming into Art Deco confections with new ideas about faceting. And World War II saw a major Jewish exodus from Europe, and any portable wealth, which oftentimes is gemstones, could be taken with by sewing stones into the hem of a dress or hiding stones at the bottom of a toothpaste tube and then selling them in a new country to start life over. It's a sad legacy of the value of stones. This is a really tiny reason, but I think it's worth mentioning. Sometimes stones are recut to attach a better provenance to their cutting. The most extreme version of this is the Star of Africa, a stone found in 1905 and so enormous at over 3,000 carats that it was kind of unsellable. Eventually, the Transvaal colony government bought the stone and gave it to King Edward of England. He then had Joseph Osher cut the stone. And that meant that everyone who wasn't King Edward of England, who had a stone that wasn't the Star of Africa, might want Osher to cut their stones as well, just to gain that association, to elevate their own status and the status of their gemstone. And this is true with a number of stones. The Williamson pink diamond was cut by Brifel and LeMay in 1948 and is now the Elizabeth pink, Queen Elizabeth's favorite diamond. Harry Winston's cutter, Paston Cullen Jr., introduced something called the Winston look, with more facets than ever before to make more brilliance. So anyone with a sad old diamond that didn't have the Winston look might think about changing that. But the real reason, the 99% reason that stones are recut, is sparkle. Make it sparkle more, make it sparkle better. And this pursuit of sparkle involves the entire history of stone cutting. There's a major shift in what gemstones were for and why we valued them, and that involves a lot of really big ideas and a lot of advancing technology. Each culture had its own idea about why a stone would matter. Stones are just a bit of earth, So all of the value they have, we have invested in them. And the method we use to create that value and the justification for that value has changed over time. It's not a static thing. Which gems were precious and why we valued them has been malleable. A gemstone was frequently valued for what we knew it was conceptually, more than what it looked like or what it added to us visually. Gazing into a stone was sometimes more important than gazing at the stone. Appreciating the stone's connection to nature, appreciating where it came from, appreciating the colors of the stone were important aspects of valuing a gemstone. Many gemstones were treasured for their hardness, not for their looks. A diamond on a sword hilt looked nice, but more importantly, it lent its hardness to the warrior. Better and more and bigger diamonds on you as a warrior made you a better warrior. Diamonds were considered by some to be solidified water, motion frozen in time. There were lots of different ideas about the metaphorical or poetic aspects of what a gemstone was. Also, throughout history, stones have been valued not for what they looked like or for their use in jewelry, but for their hardness as tools. Historically, the Chinese did not have native diamonds, but they had a very long tradition of using diamond-tipped cutting tools to carve jade, which is a native material in China. So in short, this idea of forcing geometry onto nature, onto stones, was not part of the program for most of our time on this planet. It's a pretty recent idea. Long before we figured out how to change nature to suit our own desires, to alter stones, we were content to just integrate them in their more native state. So just polish up the surface and use those existing gemstones the way nature made them in our jewelry as a piece of captured nature to augment our adornment. Stones were also thought to affect our health in very specific ways. So having stones in contact with our skin, or grinding them up and ingesting them, or grinding them up and making a poultice, an ointment, and putting it on yourself, would allow the transfer of their potency to you. It may seem like a silly idea today, but for a very long time, stones were considered healthy or unhealthy, and healthy stones were used in adornment. So the Nuremberg peace chain has a whole series of healthy stones, and we can see them on the front because they're bezel set, but there are also openings on the back so that the stones touch your skin when you're wearing the necklace. Around the world throughout history, different cultures invented different ideas about what stones could do for them. In the Middle Ages, sapphires were thought to destroy poison, so if you ingest some sapphire with your food, you won't be poisoned. They also protected wearers from fever. Beryl, which is emeralds and aquamarines, gave the wearer cheerfulness and composed the heart and mind. In these days, can you imagine how lovely that would be to just ingest some emerald and arrive at a more composed heart and mind and a more cheerful aspect? Spinel was touched to the four corners of a room or a house or a vineyard, and that would prevent lightning touchdowns. There was a long-held belief that amethyst prevents inebriation. If you grind up amethyst and put it in your wine, you won't have a hangover the next day. And for this reason, the Greeks especially were fond of making drinking cups out of amethyst. The Greeks and Romans believed that rubies emitted light in darkness, and Hindu gods are known to live in temples lit by rubies. In the Bible, Noah's Ark was illuminated by gemstones that he brought with him, satisfying instructions from God. So all different faiths involve some story of gemstones producing light. Some of this might have to do with the natural fluorescence, which creates glowing in different types of stones when exposed to different bands of light. Lots of stones fluoresce. It's also understandable that these descriptions of gemstones producing light might just be miscrediting the natural phenomenon of an unpolished stone seeming to glow from the inside when light hits it. The way light is activated in the crystal structures seems to come from within. So I can understand why somebody would misinterpret that and think that the stone itself was producing light. Diamond in India is Vajra, which also means thunderbolt, frozen thunder, frozen lightning. Imagine the power of gazing at the world through lightning bolts. Stone cutting is recorded in India as early as the 8th century, but it was different from what it is today. Stones could be cleaved, split along a fault line, and then those flat sides could be polished. So imagine if you were looking at the world through slices of diamond, through slices of frozen thunderbolts and lightning, how empowering that would be. This is not glasses that help you see better. in the real world. You can't read the newspaper more clearly with diamond lenses, but you can ward off evil, arrive at spiritual enlightenment, see the presence of God in our world, have a closer connection to the divine. The lenses of these spectacles are very old Mughal stones from the 16th century. The frames are made later, around the 1890s, and both of these spectacles were recently sold at Sotheby's. Old Indian stones were cut with facets all over the surface that removed flaws and imperfections, but didn't rethink the overall shape of the natural stone. The Great Mogul diamond is a good example. It was rose cut, facets all over the top and a flattened bottom. And those facets were just to make it sparkle more. More sparkle, enhance the natural power of the stone. More facets, more sparkle, more God. The only record we have of the Great Mogul diamond is descriptions and this drawing by Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, the man who brought the French blue to France, because it disappeared. And about the same time, Count Gregory Orlov bought this other famous rose-cut old Mughal diamond and gave it to Catherine the Great of Russia. It's likely the same stone. This is likely another example of recutting a stone to disguise it because it's very similar in shape and approach, but it has a table on top, a flat surface that's added so you can gaze into the stone and see what's happening inside as the light hits the facets on the outside. But cutting those facets was no simple endeavor. For centuries, the only way to alter the shape of a gemstone was by a process called bruting, rubbing one stone against another. So a diamond against a softer stone works pretty quickly, but diamond on diamond would be very, very slow going. So all those facets were evidence of so much labor, and that's going to enhance the stone's power as well. Conveniently, most diamonds come in a pretty nice natural state because there's this octahedral crystalline structure. So you can find smaller diamonds that are almost ready to go. You can brute the sides smooth. You can make a small flat spot at a little table on the top, and you're ready to go. And this helps explain why so much medieval jewelry is so tall. There's a large bezel setting holding that big octahedron in place. So we're only seeing the top pyramid, but there's more going on below that. Things changed in the late 15th century with the introduction of the scaphe. Ludwig van Berken introduced the scaphe, which is a rotating polishing wheel, a flat disc that rotates and is impregnated with a mixture of olive oil and diamond dust. So instead of bruting the diamonds together and that dust going away, capturing that dust and then using it as an abrasive against diamond was much more effective. And the speed of the spinning wheel allowed much more controlled grinding away of stone and a much faster grinding away of stone. And that allowed surface facets to be cut. It also allowed people to start thinking about changing the shape of the entire diamond because it was easier to cut facets. Van Berken cut 3 famous stones for Charles the Bold, and you can see that they're faceted all over in an attempt to remove the rough exterior surface, remove the surface flaws, and create a sparkling surface and maximize the stone size, keep that stone as big as possible. The overall shape of the stone was not significantly altered. It wasn't turned into a circle or a rectangle. I should note again that the history of stones is oftentimes really contradictory and disputed. Was the Florentine diamond cut by Van Berken in the 1470s, or was it cut by Pompeo Studiantoli in 1615? We can't really know. So some people out there will be saying, no, these are not cut by Van Berken and they weren't for Charles the Bold, and we don't even have the Florentine diamond. Anyway, that's a glass replica. None of it matters. The point is the technology of changing these stones with manufacturing processes was developing. Also, the story of the Sancy diamond is kind of classic. It's crazy. It was an old Indian stone of over 100 carats that was, over the course of its trajectory, lost, found, given, sold, swallowed, purchased, inherited, recut, stolen, traded, lost, found, and finally donated to a museum collection so you can now see it. And it's now 55 carats. So lots of carats removed over that whole process. None of these details really matter. The big idea is facet cutting at this point was not really focused on brilliance or optics. Diamonds reflect only about 20% of the light that hits them. So light hits the surface of the facets and bounces back. But 80% of the light that hits those surfaces goes right through and used to just bleed out the back of the stone. So the next big challenge after we learned how to cut the facets to reflect nicely was understanding how to capture that remaining 80% of the light through refraction, bouncing the light back out. Cutting facets on the bottom of the stone in such a way that the 80% of the light that goes in is redirected and bounced back out. And this was figured out around 1700 in Venice by Vincent Peruzzi. Peruzzi may have conquered the relationship between reflection, bouncing off, and refraction, bouncing back out, but he didn't understand dispersion, which is separating light into its 6 constituent colors. And that really enhances sparkle. When you look at a contemporary brilliant cut diamond, some facets appear to be blue or pink or yellow because the light inside is being split. If you think about when this was happening, it was right when Isaac Newton was starting his work understanding the color of light in 1666, and he published his book Optics in 1704. So science, the Age of Enlightenment, is a big part of this story. When you get better optics, you get better lenses. When you have better lenses, you can get an even better understanding of light. You can also get magnification. So you could look at your stones closer and see flaws that were invisible to the naked eye. And you could then develop techniques to mitigate those flaws. So you can understand that new ideas about how to cut stones would come out of all of this science. Once we get the entire science of light involved in the equation, there are all of these other considerations. The optic axis of the crystal structure of a gem and how it relates to the table and the facets might need to be reconsidered. Instead of relating your cuts to the natural outside structure of the stone, you might want something on a diagonal inside. You might want to remove more of the stone. You might want to position any color variation or flaws in an intentional way to maximize or minimize the effect they have on the color and the light qualities. So for the first time in history, the weight of a stone became secondary to the way that stone was cut. Nature started to matter less than what we did with it. The Koh-i-Noor diamond comes back into the narrative now because it's a really good example of this. It probably is an ancient stone. It first appears in writing in 1628 as part of Shah Jahan's collection. And for the British, who were busy conquering India, owning this stone became a really important symbolic representation of also owning the continent and the people on it. And part of the 1849 Treaty of Lahore required that the Koh-i-Noor be given to Queen Victoria by its owner, Duleep Singh. Not taken by the British. They didn't want to be accused of that. They wanted it given. So that was part of this legal contract. It was, at the time, cut in the traditional Mughal style with surface facets all over to let light in and a large table for gazing at the light effects inside as a result of that, looking at the imprisoned light. And that's where the name Koh-i-Noor comes from. It means mountain of light. At the time, it was part of an arm amulet, so it was worn on the arm to lend the wearer the power and strength of nature and the stone. But what would Imperial Britain care for gazing at lightscapes or even the idea of frozen lightning bolts when there was industry and science to honor instead? The stone was recut according to contemporary understanding of facet alignment and relationships. There were 66 facets with added star facets on the back. But the back and front facets were not correctly aligned to get reflection and refraction happening. And to get rid of the natural inclusions, the stone had to be made very shallow. And so most of the light just bled right through. So 86 carats were ground away, and it was no brighter than it had been before. The stone went on view at the 1851 Crystal Palace Exposition, and people who embraced industry thought the stone was a failure because industry hadn't improved it, and people who didn't embrace industry saw the stone as a really potent representation of how wrong we can be when we try and impose our own will on nature and on other people. As technology continued to advance, it affected the progress of gem cutting. In the 1880s, we started to use electricity for a lot of things. One of the things we tried to do with it was make synthetic diamonds through a process called sintering. Carbon was laid out on a bed of silicon and electricity run through that in an effort to convert that carbon into diamonds. It didn't totally work. It didn't make gem quality diamonds, but it did make tiny bits of synthetic diamond, of silicon carbide, of carborundum, which we could use for polishing. Electricity also allowed a shift from hand-powered equipment to motor-driven equipment, and that allowed more consistency. So starting in the 1880s, we could power our machinery and use synthetic abrasives to produce ever more refined and precise facets on stones. Another important aspect of gem cutting is that it isn't a guild-based craft. It arrived after guild systems were pretty much in place, and so it lived outside of guilds and became a skill that was passed on generation to generation through families. As a result, the skill level required was extreme, and the information was private, not shared. That started to change. In 1919, Marcel Tolkowski, who was a Belgian and Polish engineer who came from an old diamond cutting family, published a book called Diamond Design, in which he established what he believed were the right angles for faceting modern round brilliant stones. And this helped advance thinking about how a stone should be cut to be the most sparkly possible. Tolkowski's plan included pavilion facets on the bottom of the stone at 41 degrees, and crown facets on the top at 34 degrees, and a specific percentage width for the table. All of it was rationalized. And if you followed that plan, you got a better cut. But even once we figured out the right way, which by the way wasn't the final right way, it was just 1920s version of the right way, to cut a stone, there was a big difference between the concept and the reality. And that's because of the equipment being used. These images show how facets were ground onto stone, totally by hand, by eye, by intuition, and by skill. The stone is attached to a dop stick, which has a pointed end. That stick is then inserted into a jam peg, a board or a curved shape with holes drilled in at different angles and different positions. And by positioning the stick in a different hole, you could control the angle it would meet the scaphe and produce a facet. And then once that facet was cut, you rotate it manually and just decide where to put it down next. So you can see that this is not science really, this is skill. Will all those facets line up perfectly? Maybe, maybe not, only if you really know what you're doing. This, I hope, helps explain why gem cutting was a highly specialized trade, practiced by a very small group of skilled craftsmen. And many stones today have been recut because those original facets were done in this older method and weren't perfectly aligned. The images of these jam pegs were hard to find, and they're lent to me by Justin K. Prim, a stonecutter today who has a vast knowledge and a vast collection of historical equipment. As you can imagine, really old wooden jam pegs are not things that are treasured much in this world or kept in museums or photographed anywhere. I'm linking to his channel below so you can watch some of his really remarkable videos that illuminate the entire process of stone cutting. As with all mechanical operations, measuring and machining advanced, and accuracy went from being something exceptional that very few people had access to something available to all. And that applied itself to faceting as well. Faceting became ever more precise. Indexing heads had been used in machine shops for almost 100 years at this point. An indexing head is a disc with holes exactly placed so that as you rotate it, your work rotates in a controlled amount. For cutting gears, for cutting teeth, and when they were miniaturized and attached to a handset, cutting facets. The advance in technology and accuracy corresponded in time with a huge increase in the availability of diamonds. When diamonds were discovered in South Africa, the number of small diamonds that needed faceting exploded. So there was an increased interest in improving the equipment being used to facet them. Starting in the first decade of the 20th century, we could use indexing heads to control the rotation and get the facet alignment exact. Instead of being done through intuition and skill, it could be done through mechanism. And really for the first time, the science of optics and our ability to produce the mechanics of optics could line up better. Other advances also helped increase accuracy. We got variable speed motors, so you could have better polishing. Some things need to be polished at faster speeds or slower speeds. We got flaw detecting machines like polariscopes, so you could look into the stone and better understand where and how to cut it. We got girdling machines to better produce the facets around the outside girdle of a stone. And I think almost most interestingly, we got a lot more books. When I started my research for this, I went down to my school library and was thrilled to discover there were 12 books on the lapidary arts, on polishing and faceting stones, because that used to be an important part of the jewelry department. The equipment left, the skills left, but the books stayed on the shelf. And this was true around the world, but specifically in America in the 1940s, there were lapidary programs at many high schools. 4 of the books I read were high school textbooks. And there was another wave of publishing in the 1960s when there were some books put out for professionals on newer ideas about cutting and newer optics. And with the addition of computers in the 1980s, the landscape changed again. We got computer analysis to better understand how to cut the stone. We got computer-controlled cutting for even more accuracy. And we got this modern landscape of ultimate precision. So why not go back and rethink and recut some of those older stones that were done by hand? The craft execution instead of a science execution was ripe for revisiting. Today, we think that our perfection and the sparkle that it brings to a stone is worth the trade-off for some lost carats. Losing a few carats to get a sparklier stone is a worthwhile transaction. For what it's worth, this pink stone is the Agra diamond, which was a 16th century Golconda stone purchased by the Duke of Brunswick and a big part of my original research. And it's got a crazy origin story involving an interrolith and a horse and some soldiers. Check it out. Another advance worth mentioning is that there was a change in thinking about how to house these new brilliant cut stones. Ferdinand Herpers was a jewelry setting manufacturer in Newark, New Jersey, which was a hotbed of jewelry setting manufacturing. And he patented his improvement in diamond setting in 1872. And then 8 years later sold that patent to Charles Tiffany. So what we know of as the Tiffany diamond setting is Herpers' idea of lifting up the stone using platinum prongs and allowing not only the reflection off the surface and the refraction from the inside and the dispersion from the correct alignment of the facets, but letting light also come in from below and increasing the amount of light that can enter the stone and really bring that brilliant cut to life. And you have to ask yourself, are we done? Have we finished rethinking the size of our stones and updating older cuts to fit our newer ideas about what makes a good stone? The answer, of course, is no. Duh. We're never done. We're always desperate to smear new technology on old things, and diamonds are no exception. In a desperate move to advance technology and to use lasers, we're kind of right back where we were with the ancient ideas of the Mughal cut, covering the surface of a stone with facets without really considering what's going on inside the internal relationship of what's happening. Shawish Jewelry made what they call the world's first all-diamond ring. It's essentially a $68 million pun because there's nothing but diamond. And it was originally a 150 carat natural diamond. It was cut with lasers and has facets all over. So the outside surface sparkles, but gone is all of that understanding of what's happening inside. And the ring on the right is a 45 carat laboratory grown diamond that has been cut using water jet and laser beams to the tune of $250,000, and they don't even know how many facets are on it. It has a never before seen amount of facets, between 2,000 and 3,000. It was designed by Johnny Ive, the Apple computer designer, and Mark Newson, celebrity designer. So this is not about the quality of the stone and optics. This is about technology and celebrity. So maybe we're going to start rethinking our stones based on that. This also might not be the last time we decide what a gemstone means and why we value it. You may have snickered at the idea of putting ground up amethyst in your wine, but there are still lots of people in our world that believe that contact with a stone, putting a stone on you or even in you, will improve your life in some way, and the stone's power will be transmitted to you. So we're still either still there in those old beliefs or we're returning to them. So maybe someday we'll have a different idea about the right and the best and the newest way to augment the value of a gemstone. And we may come to regret all of those carats that we just ground away over time. Or maybe we'll continue to make advances and revisit the stones we have, applying new ideas to them and removing ever more carats in the interest of that still undefined goal. Time will tell. So that was my postscript to the Tiffany Diamond Feather. History of gemstone cutting and why stones are cut down. It's likely that there's going to be some future postscripts because questions just keep coming to the surface. I have to have the heat off in here so that the blowing air doesn't mess up the sound recording. So it's now gone from 62 degrees when I started to 46 degrees. Watch my skin turn blue.